rather than empirical grounds. What mattered for employment, we argued, was not wages in dollars or pounds or kroner, but real wages, what the wages would buy in goods and services. Low unemployment would, indeed, mean pressure for a higher real wage. But real wages could be higher even if nominal wages were lower, provided that prices were still lower. Similarly, high unemployment would, indeed, mean pressure for a lower real wage. But real wages could be lower, even if nominal wages were higher, provided prices were still higher. There is no need to assume a stable Phillips curve in order to explain the apparent tendency for an acceleration of inflation to reduce unemployment. That can be explained by the impact of unanticipated changes in nominal demand on markets characterized by, implicit or explicit, long-term commitments with respect to both capital and labor. Long-term labor commitments can be explained by the cost of acquiring information by employers about employees and by employees about alternative employment opportunities, plus the specific human capital that makes an employee's value to a particular employer grow over time and exceed his value to other potential employers. Only surprises matter. If everyone anticipated that prices would rise at, say, 20% a year, then this anticipation would be embodied in future wage and other contracts. Real wages would then behave precisely as they would if everyone anticipated no price rise, and there would be no reason for the 20% rate of inflation to be associated with a different level of unemployment than a zero rate. An unanticipated change is very different, especially in the presence of long-term commitments, themselves partly a result of the imperfect knowledge whose effect they enhance and spread over time. Long-term commitments mean, first, that there is not instantaneous market clearing, as in markets for perishable foods, but only a lagged adjustment of both prices and quantity to changes in demand or supply, as in the house rental market. Second, that commitments entered into depend not only on current observable prices, but also on the prices expected to prevail throughout the term of the commitment. 3. Stage 2. Natural rate hypothesis. Proceeding along these lines, we, in particular, E.S. Phelps and myself, developed an alternative hypothesis that distinguished between the short-run and long-run effects of unanticipated changes in the aggregate nominal demand. Start from some initial stable position and let there be, for example, an unanticipated acceleration of aggregate nominal demand. This will come to each producer as an unexpectedly favorable demand for his product. In an environment in which changes are always occurring in the relative demand for different goods, he will not know whether this change is special to him or pervasive. It will be rational for him to interpret it as at least partly special and to react to it by seeking to produce more to sell at what he now perceives to be a higher than expected market price for future output. He will be willing to pay higher nominal wages than he had been willing to pay before in order to attract additional workers. The real wage that matters to him is the wage in terms of the price of his product, and he perceives that price as higher than before. A higher nominal wage can therefore mean a lower real wage as perceived by him. To workers, the situation is different. What matters to them is the purchasing power of wages, not over the particular good they produce, but over all goods in general. Both they and their employers are likely to adjust more slowly their perception of prices in general, because it is more costly to acquire information about that, than their perception of the price of the particular good they produce. As a result, a rise in nominal wages may be perceived by workers as a rise in real wages, and hence call forth an increased supply, at the same time that it is perceived by employers as a fall in real wages, and hence calls forth an increased offer of jobs. Expressed in terms of the average of perceived future prices, real wages are lower. In terms of the perceived future average price, real wages are higher. But this situation is temporary. Let the higher rate of growth of aggregate nominal demand and of prices continue, and perceptions will adjust to reality. When they do, the initial effect will disappear and then even be reversed for a time as workers and employers find themselves locked into inappropriate contracts. Ultimately, employment will be back at the level that prevailed before the assumed unanticipated acceleration in aggregate nominal demand. This alternative hypothesis is depicted in Figure 2 in the bonus PDF. Each negatively sloping curve is a Phillips curve like that in Figure 1, except that it is for a particular anticipated or perceived rate of inflation, defined as the perceived average rate of price change, not the average of perceived rates of individual price change. The order of the curves would be reversed for the second concept. Start from point E and let the rate of inflation, for whatever reason, move from A to B and stay there. Unemployment would initially decline to U sub L at point F, moving along the curve defined for an anticipated rate of inflation. The quantity 1 divided by capital P times the derivative of capital P with respect to T, star of A. As anticipations adjusted, the short-run curve would move upward, ultimately to the curve defined for an anticipated inflation rate of B. Concurrently, unemployment would move gradually over from F to G. This analysis is, of course, oversimplified. It supposes a single unanticipated change, whereas, of course, there is a continuing stream of unanticipated changes. It does not deal explicitly with lags, or with overshooting, or with the process of formation of anticipations. But it does highlight the key points. What matters is not inflation per se, but unanticipated inflation. There is no stable trade-off between inflation and unemployment. There is a natural rate of unemployment, U sub n, which is consistent with the real forces and with accurate perceptions. Unemployment can be kept below that level only by an accelerating inflation, or above it only by accelerating deflation. The natural rate of unemployment, a term I introduced to parallel Newt-Wicksel's natural rate of interest, is not a numerical constant, but depends on real as opposed to monetary factors. The effectiveness of the labor market, the extent of competition or monopoly, the barriers or encouragements to working in various occupations, and so on. For example, the natural rate has clearly been rising in the United States for two major reasons. First, women, teenagers, and part-time workers have been constituting a growing fraction of the labor force. These groups are more mobile in employment than other workers, entering and leaving the labor market, shifting more frequently between jobs. As a result, they tend to experience higher average rates of unemployment. Second, unemployment insurance and other forms of assistance to unemployed persons have been made available to more categories of workers and have become more generous in duration and amount. Workers who lose their jobs are under less pressure to look for other work, will tend to wait longer in the hope, generally fulfilled, of being recalled to their former employment, and can be more selective in the alternatives they consider. Further, the availability of unemployment insurance makes it more attractive to enter the labor force in the first place, and so may itself have stimulated both the growth that has occurred in the labor force as a percentage of the population and its changing composition. The determinants of the natural rate of unemployment deserve much fuller analysis for both the United States and other countries. So also do the meaning of the recorded unemployment figures and the relation between the recorded figures and the natural rate. These issues are all of the utmost importance for public policy. However, they are side issues for my present limited purpose. The connection between the state of employment and the level of efficiency or productivity of an economy is another topic that is of fundamental importance for public policy, but is a side issue for my present purpose. There is a tendency to take it for granted that a high level of recorded unemployment is evidence of inefficient use of resources, and conversely. This view is seriously in error. A low level of unemployment may be a sign of a forced draft economy that is using its resources inefficiently and is inducing workers to sacrifice leisure for goods that they value less highly than the leisure under the mistaken belief that their real wages will be higher than they prove to be. Or, a low natural rate of unemployment may reflect institutional arrangements that inhibit change. A highly static, rigid economy may have a fixed place for everyone, whereas a dynamic, highly progressive economy, which offers ever-changing opportunities and fosters flexibility, may have a high natural rate of unemployment. To illustrate how the same rate may correspond to very different conditions, both Japan and the United Kingdom had low average rates of unemployment from, say, 1950 to 1970. But Japan experienced rapid growth, the United Kingdom, stagnation. The natural rate, or accelerationist, or expectations-adjusted Phillips curve hypothesis, as it has been variously designated, is by now widely accepted by economists, though by no means universally. A few still cling to the original Phillips curve. More recognize the difference between short-run and long-run curves, but regard even the long-run curve as negatively sloped, though more steeply so than the short-run curves. Some substitute a stable relation between the acceleration of inflation and unemployment for a stable relation between inflation and unemployment, aware of but not concerned about the possibility that the same logic that drove them to a second derivative will drive them to even higher derivatives. Much current economic research is devoted to exploring various aspects of this second stage, the dynamics of the process, the formation of expectations, and the kind of systematic policy, if any, that can have a predictable effect on real magnitudes. We can expect rapid progress on these issues. Special mention should be made of the work on rational expectations, especially the seminal contributions of John Muth, Robert Lucas, and Thomas Sargent. 4. Stage 3. A positively sloped Phillips curve? Although the second stage is far from having been fully explored, let alone fully absorbed into the economic literature, the course of events is already producing a move to a third stage. In recent years, higher inflation has often been accompanied by higher, not lower, unemployment, especially for periods of several years in length. A simple statistical Phillips curve for such periods seems to be positively sloped, not vertical. The third stage is directed at accommodating this apparent empirical phenomenon. To do so, I suspect that it will have to include in the analysis the interdependence of economic experience and political developments. It will have to treat at least some political phenomena not as independent variables, as exogenous variables in econometric jargon, but as themselves determined by economic events, as endogenous variables. Gordon, 1975b. The second stage was greatly influenced by two major developments in economic theory of the past few decades. One, the analysis of imperfect information and of the cost of acquiring information, pioneered by George Stigler. The other, the role of human capital in determining the form of labor contracts, pioneered by Gary Becker. The third stage will, I believe, be greatly influenced by a third major development, the application of economic analysis to political behavior, a field in which pioneering work has also been done by Stigler and Becker, as well as by Kenneth Arrow, Duncan Black, Anthony Downs, James Buchanan, Gordon Tullock, and others. The apparent positive relation between inflation and unemployment has been a source of great concern to government policymakers. Let me quote from a recent speech by Prime Minister Callaghan of Great Britain. "We used to think that you could just spend your way out of a recession and increase employment by cutting taxes and boosting government spending. I tell you, in all candor, that that option no longer exists, and that insofar as it ever did exist, it only worked by injecting a bigger dose of inflation into the economy, followed by higher levels of unemployment as the next step. That is the history of the past 20 years. The same view is expressed in a Canadian government white paper. Continuing inflation, particularly in North America, has been accompanied by an increase in measured unemployment rates. These are remarkable statements, running as they do directly counter to the policies adopted by almost every Western government throughout the post-war period. A. Some evidence. More systematic evidence for the past 2 decades is given in Table 1 and Figures 3 and 4, which show the rates of inflation and unemployment in 7 industrialized countries over the past 2 decades. According to the 5-year averages in Table 1, the rate of inflation and the level of unemployment moved in opposite directions, the expected simple Phillips curve outcome, in 5 out of 7 countries between the first 2 quinquennia. 1956 to 60, 1961 to 65. In only 4 out of 7 countries between the second and third quinquennia, 1961 to 65 and 1966 to 70. And in only 1 out of 7 countries between the final 2 quinquennia, 1966 to 70 and 1970 to 75. And even the one exception, Italy, is not a real exception. True, unemployment averaged a shade lower from 1971 to 1975 than in the prior 5 years, despite a more than tripling of the rate of inflation. However, since 1973, both inflation and unemployment have risen sharply. The averages for all 7 countries plotted in Figure 3 bring out even more clearly the shift from a negatively sloped simple Phillips curve to a positively sloped one. The 2 curves move in opposite directions between the first 2 quinquennia, in the same direction thereafter. The annual data in Figure 4 tell a similar, though more confused, story. In the early years, there is wide variation in the relation between prices and unemployment, varying from essentially no relation, as in Italy, to a fairly clear-cut year-to-year negative relation, as in the United Kingdom and the United States. In recent years, however, France, the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, and Japan all show a clearly marked rise in both inflation and unemployment. Though for Japan, the rise in unemployment is much smaller relative to the rise in inflation than in the other countries, reflecting the different meaning of unemployment in the different institutional environment of Japan. Only Sweden and Italy fail to conform to the general pattern. Of course, these data are at most suggestive. We do not really have 7 independent bodies of data. Common international influences affect all countries, so that multiplying the number of countries does not multiply proportionately the amount of evidence. In particular, the oil crisis hit all 7 countries at the same time. Whatever effect the crisis had on the rate of inflation, it directly disrupted the productive process and tended to increase unemployment. Any such increases can hardly be attributed to the acceleration of inflation that accompanied them. At most, the 2 could be regarded as at least partly the common result of a third influence. Gordon, 1975a. Both the quinquennial and annual data show that the oil crisis cannot wholly explain the phenomenon described so graphically by Callaghan. Already, before the quadrupling of oil prices in 1973, most countries show a clearly marked association of rising inflation and rising unemployment. But this too may reflect independent forces, rather than the influence of inflation on unemployment. For example, the same forces that have been raising the natural rate of unemployment in the United States may have been operating in other countries and may account for their rising trend of unemployment, independently of the consequences of inflation.
The water intake is in the flood access tunnel.
Despite these qualifications, the data strongly suggests that, at least in some countries, of which Britain, Canada, and Italy may be the best examples, rising inflation and rising unemployment have been mutually reinforcing, rather than the separate effects of separate causes. The data are not inconsistent with the stronger statement that, in all industrialized countries, higher rates of inflation have some effects that, at least for a time, make for higher unemployment. The rest of this paper is devoted to a preliminary exploration of what some of these effects may be. B. A tentative hypothesis. I conjecture that a modest elaboration of the natural rate hypothesis is all that is required to account for a positive relation between inflation and unemployment. Though, of course, such a positive relation may also occur for other reasons. Just as the natural rate hypothesis explains a negatively sloped Phillips curve over short periods as a temporary phenomenon that will disappear as economic agents adjust their expectations to reality, so a positively sloped Phillips curve over somewhat longer periods may occur as a transitional phenomenon that will disappear as economic agents adjust not only their expectations, but their institutional and political arrangements to a new reality. When this is achieved, I believe that, as the natural rate hypothesis suggests, the rate of unemployment will be largely independent of the average rate of inflation, though the efficiency of utilization of resources may not be. High inflation need not mean either abnormally high or abnormally low unemployment. However, the institutional and political arrangements that accompany it, either as relics of earlier history or as products of the inflation itself, are likely to prove antithetical to the most productive use of employed resources. A special case of the distinction between the state of employment and the productivity of an economy referred to earlier. Experience in many Latin American countries that have adjusted to chronically high inflation rates. Experience that has been analyzed most perceptively by some of my colleagues, particularly Arnold Harburger, 1967, and Larry Shostak, 1974, is consistent, I believe, with the view. In the version of the natural rate hypothesis summarized in Figure 2, the vertical curve is for alternative rates of fully anticipated inflation. Whatever that rate, be it negative, zero, or positive, it can be built into every decision if it is fully anticipated. At an anticipated 20% per year inflation, for example, long-term wage contracts would provide for a wage in each year that would rise relative to the zero inflation wage by just 20% per year. Long-term loans would bear an interest rate 20% higher than the zero inflation rate, or a principal that would be raised by 20% a year, and so on. In short, the equivalent of a full indexing of all contracts. The high rate of inflation would have some real effects by altering desired cash balances, for example. But it need not alter the efficiency of labor markets, or the length or terms of labor contracts, and hence, it need not change the natural rate of unemployment. This analysis implicitly supposes, first, that inflation is steady, or at least no more variable at a high rate than at a low. Otherwise, it is unlikely that inflation would be as fully anticipated at high as at low rates of inflation. Second, that the inflation is, or can be, open, with all prices free to adjust to the higher rate, so that relative price adjustments are the same with a 20% inflation as with zero inflation. Third, really a variant of the second point, that there are no obstacles to indexing of contracts. Ultimately, if inflation at an average rate of 20% per year were to prevail for many decades, these requirements could come fairly close to being met, which is why I'm inclined to retain the long-run vertical Phillips curve. But when a country initially moves to higher rates of inflation, these requirements will be systematically departed from, and such a transitional period may well extend over decades. Consider, in particular, the United States and the United Kingdom. For 2 centuries before World War II for the United Kingdom, and a century and a half for the United States, prices varied about a roughly constant level, showing substantial increases in time of war, then post-war declines to roughly pre-war levels. The concept of a normal price level was deeply embedded in the financial and other institutions of the 2 countries, and in the habits and attitudes of their citizens. In the immediate post-World War II period, prior experience was widely expected to recur. The fact was post-war inflation superimposed on wartime inflation. Yet the expectation in both countries was deflation. It took a long time for the fear of post-war deflation to dissipate, if it still has, and still longer before expectations started to adjust to the fundamental change in the monetary system. That adjustment is still far from complete. Klein, 1975. Indeed, we do not know what a complete adjustment will consist of. We cannot know now whether the industrialized countries will return to the pre-World War II pattern of a long-term stable price level, or will move toward the Latin American pattern of chronically high inflation rates, with every now and then an acute outbreak of super or hyperinflation, as occurred recently in Chile and Argentina. Harburger, 1976, or will undergo more radical economic and political change, leading to a still different resolution of the present ambiguous situation. This uncertainty, or more precisely, the circumstances producing this uncertainty, leads to systematic departures from the conditions required for a vertical Phillips curve. The most fundamental departure is that a high inflation rate is not likely to be steady during the transition decades. Rather, the higher the rate, the more variable it is likely to be. That has been empirically true of differences among countries in the past several decades. Jaffe and Kleiman, 1975, Logue and Willett, 1976.
Head home at the Baron's hatch.
It is also highly plausible on theoretical grounds, both about actual inflation and, even more clearly, the anticipations of economic agents with respect to inflation. Governments have not produced high inflation as a deliberate announced policy, but as a consequence of other policies. In particular, policies of full employment and welfare state policies raising government spending. They all proclaim their adherence to the goal of stable prices. They do so in response to their constituents, who may welcome many of the side effects of inflation, but are still wedded to the concept of stable money. A burst of inflation produces strong pressure to counter it. Policy goes from one direction to the other, encouraging wide variation in the actual and anticipated rate of inflation. And, of course, in such an environment, no one has single-valued anticipations. Everyone recognizes that there's great uncertainty about what actual inflation will turn out to be over any specific future interval. Jaffe and Kleiman, 1975, Meiselman, 1976. The tendency for inflation that is high on the average to be highly variable is reinforced by the effect of inflation on the political cohesiveness of a country, in which institutional arrangements and financial contracts have been adjusted to a long-term, normal price level. Some groups gain, for example, homeowners. Others
Let's
lose,
head home at the Baron's
for
hatch.
example, owners of savings accounts and fixed interest securities. Prudent behavior becomes, in fact, reckless, and reckless behavior, in fact, prudent. The society is polarized. One group is set against another. Political unrest increases. The capacity of any government to govern is reduced at the same time that the pressure for strong action grows. An increased variability of actual or anticipated inflation may raise the natural rate of unemployment in two rather different ways. First, increased volatility shortens the optimum length of unindexed commitments and renders indexing more advantageous. Gray, 1976. But it takes time for actual practice to adjust. In the meantime, prior arrangements introduce rigidities that reduce the effectiveness of markets.
10 minutes to get out
An
of
additional
there. I
element
repeat,
of
10
uncertainty
minutes.
is, as it were, added to every market arrangement. In addition, indexing is, even at best, an imperfect substitute for stability of the inflation rate. Price indexes are imperfect. They are available only with a lag and generally are applied to contract terms only with a further lag. These developments clearly lower economic efficiency. It is less clear what their effect is on recorded unemployment. High average inventories of all kinds are one way to meet increased rigidity and uncertainty. But that may mean labor hoarding by enterprises and low unemployment, or a larger force of workers between jobs and so high unemployment. Shorter commitments may mean more rapid adjustment of employment to changed conditions and so low unemployment, or the delay in adjusting the length of commitments may lead to less satisfactory adjustment and so high unemployment. Clearly, much additional research is necessary in this area to clarify the relative importance of the various effects. About all one can say now is that the slow adjustment of commitments and the imperfections of indexing may contribute to the recorded increase in unemployment. A second related effect of increased volatility of inflation is to render market prices a less efficient system for coordinating economic activity. A fundamental function of a price system, as Hayek, 1945, emphasized so brilliantly, is to transmit compactly, efficiently, and at low cost the information that economic agents need in order to decide what to produce and how to produce it, or how to employ owned resources. The relevant information is about relative prices of one product relative to another, of the services of one factor of production relative to another, of products relative to factor services, of prices now relative to prices in the future. But the information in practice is transmitted in the form of absolute prices, prices in dollars or pounds or kroner. If the price level is on the average stable or changing at a steady rate, it is relatively easy to extract the signal about relative prices from the observed absolute prices. The more volatile the rate of general inflation, the harder it becomes to extract the signal about relative prices from the absolute prices. The broadcast about relative prices is, as it were, being jammed by the noise coming from the inflation broadcast. Lucas, 1973, 1975, Harburger, 1976. At the extreme, the system of absolute prices becomes nearly useless, and economic agents resort either to an alternative currency or to barter, with disastrous
Let's head home
effects
at
on
the North
productivity.
Complex elevator.
Again, the effect on economic efficiency is clear. On unemployment, less so. But again, it seems plausible that the average level of unemployment would be raised by the increased amount of noise in market signals, at least during the period when institutional arrangements are not yet adapted to the new situation. These effects of increased volatility of inflation would occur even if prices were legally free to adjust, if, in that sense, the inflation were open. In practice, the distorting effects of uncertainty, rigidity of voluntary long-term contracts, and the contamination of price signals will almost certainly be reinforced by legal restrictions on price change. In the modern world, governments are themselves producers of services sold on the market, from postal services to a wide range of other items. Other prices are regulated by government and require government approval for change, from airfares to taxicab fares to charges for electricity. In these cases, governments cannot avoid being involved in the price-fixing process. In addition, the social and political forces unleashed by volatile inflation rates will lead governments to try to repress inflation in still other areas, by explicit price and wage control, or by pressuring private businesses or unions voluntarily to exercise restraint, or by speculating in foreign exchange in order to alter the exchange rate. The details will vary from time to time and from country to country, but the general result is the same: reduction in the capacity of the price system to guide economic activity, distortions in relative prices because of the introduction of greater friction, as it were, in all markets, and, very likely, a higher recorded rate of unemployment. Friedman, 1976, Chapter 12. The forces I've just described may render the political and economic system dynamically unstable and produce hyperinflation and radical political change, as in many defeated countries after World War I, or in Chile and Argentina more recently. At the other extreme, before any such catastrophe occurs, policies may be adopted that will achieve a relatively low and stable rate of inflation and lead to the dismantling of many of the interferences with the price system. That would reestablish the preconditions for the straightforward natural rate hypothesis and enable that hypothesis to be used to predict the course of the transition. An intermediate possibility is that the system will reach stability at a fairly constant, though high, average rate of inflation. In that case, unemployment should also settle down to a fairly constant level, decidedly lower than during the transition. As the preceding discussion emphasizes, increasing volatility and increasing government intervention with the price system are the major factors that seem likely to raise unemployment, not high volatility or a high level of intervention. Ways of coping with both volatility and intervention will develop through indexing and similar arrangements for coping with volatility of inflation, through the development.
Alo. Mamă, ce faci? La cine? Dacă nu mă auzi, nu înseamnă că nu mergi. Apasă ori. Da, eu știu, dar nu. Aș mai trage, nu știu, vedem. Ok. Cred, Oricuța, dar nu. Nu cred că ajung.
Let's go to that location.
Vin mâine dacă e. Dar nu mai ies azi, mai ies azi. Îți ori. Le ții. Bine că nu se strică. Trec mâini. Da. Ce pomană. Da, da, poți să fac tu pe aia, nu mai vreau. Ce pomană îi? De unde? De la catering, da? Nu există dacă ai pus cana în funcțiune. Păi de ce să nu te pricepi? Păi asta ce? O pui și o încarci. Hai, domnule, ai un buton de apăsat. Ce butoane? Tu ai doar un buton de apăsat. Ce tot
Head home at the Red Lakes hatch.
Păi e și bună supa? Ai pus de ăla? E fain, nu? Eu da gust. Nu i-o da gust? Eu da gust? Păi, vezi, tu nu foloseai de asta. De ce nu puneai tu de asta? Dar de ce tot bați tu pe borș? Nu-i mai bună supa? Simți nevoia de acru? Simți nevoia de acru? Dar fă și tu supă, borș de sfeclă. Nu mai folosi borșul de la ăștia. Pune și tu borș de Olimpia de la magazin, că e mai sfânt. Ba, este foarte adevărat, crede-mă pe mine. Măcar de-ar fi borș de tărâță de ăla ca lumea, dar nu... Dar nici nu se simte acreala ori. Nici nu se simte acreala. Da. Păi ce, n-ai voi? Ia cruți. Ei bine, atunci mâncăm supă. Bine, măricuță. Cred că da, cred că pentru supiță ies. Da. O ce? Bine, ricuță. Îi pup. Te iubesc, pa. Nu, Maria e la muncă. Ținem legătură. Da, bă. Da, ori am auzit. Da, doar e bună și mâine. Să văd dacă e... Pa.
Let's head home at the Red Lakes hatch.
Pa.
Okay. Hey there. Hey there.
Don't shoot!
Yes.
You good? You good? Yeah. Okay. We good. We good. See you later. Bye bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Weird. Okay,
Yes. Thanks.
let's go.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Condiments are not currency. Stop trying to take insult packets.
Să-mi bag pula în mâncare. Cum să-mi bag pula în
Raider.
Hi.
Let's go to the
Jedwin
Grandioso
here.
apartments.
You'll find their cache around Murano Station, marked with a ribbon. A little sabotage should do the trick.
I've got a hatch key. Could be interesting. Looking for some light ammo. I have some light ammo.
Have a stitcher. Have ammo, no worry. What weapon do you have?
Some light ammo.
You
Here.
have shotgun? Thanks. You have shotgun?
I have some light ammo.
What weapon is that? Shotgun? Shotgun. Maybe we stay together, guys. What the fuck?
Want to team
This
up?
might be worth checking. Follow me. Could be something. Over here. Hey, a vase.
Yes.
Hey, follow me. Go aggressive over here. Picked up some noise. In there. Watching for hostiles. Over here. Stay clear of the Grandioso apartments.
This has been looted, so be careful.
Okay.
Yes.
Over here. Knocked out Raider. Over here.
Stay together, stay together.
I'm watching this spot. Searching for loot here. Regroup down there. Looks like someone has been here already. Attack. Follow me. On me, come on. Let's head home at the southern station.
Already? Okay.
Attack, over here. Come on me.
I'm on.
down there. Got a door. Head home at the southern station.
You go alone, man.
Follow me. Leaper, down here. Leaper.
Where is Leaper? Where is the Leaper?
An Arc orbiter is en route. The safe window is closing. You have 10 minutes to return to Speranza. I repeat, 10 minutes.
Here.
Hmm.
Okay.
Let's go to the hospital.
What's up?
Hello, my friend. Hello.
Stupid or something, I don't know. Stupid, no? No, no.
Ah, my friend, you with us or with who? Ah, my friend. Hey, hey.
Oh, it's
Hello, my friend.
fuck you, bitch.
Fuck you too. Fuck you.
Marsha,
كس أمك.
Marsha. Stop this. Yeah, bitches. Acho que não é. mașini să știi. Deci, ulică, ulică. O, prost. Târnă, ce să târnă? Ia stai să vedem noi.
Watch your backs, Raiders. The matriarch has been spotted near your location. Keep your wits about you if you decide to go anywhere near, and always keep a close eye on her children.
care shaft.
Granted, I repeat, passage is granted.
Appreciated.